Thank you. Welcome everyone to Local Plan Working Group, joined by several officers. I'm Councillor Ben Burton, joined by Becky Eade, Alison Cook and Claire Fole, and Louise Cook as the Democracy Officer, and we'll be joined by another officer to join in due course. We've got a couple of attendee changes. Councillor Fisher is unavailable, so Councillor Hook is the substitute, and we have no Councillor Wan today. Some housekeeping, classic. If you need to go to the toilet, toilets are over there. There isn't a planned fire alarm. If there is a fire alarm, follow us down the stairs and we'll show you the way out, essentially. We'll move forward into declarations of interest for this meeting. Does anyone have any declarations they'd like to make? I'm not seeing any hands, so we'll move on. The second item is the minutes of the previous meeting, which was some time ago now, but I'm sure you'll have all seen records on them. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes or happy to approve them? I'm not seeing any comments, so we'll take that as them being approved, and we'll move forward. The following item is public participation. We've got two speakers. First speaker is Gwen Swinburne. If you'd like to join us, please, Gwen. I'm going to guess that you don't want a time warning for your 30 seconds. Yeah, great, thank you. Oh, you all right? Yeah. Just start when you're ready, and we'll pick it up from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding the SPDs, I'm very concerned that this report kicks the issue of short-term lets down the line with weasel words such as the need for further evidence gathering, report separately to executive. This is the biggest issue facing housing availability in this city, and all I see is weasel words. Thousands of homes are now used as holiday lets, yet staff resort to more evidence gathering, waiting for government and another report at another undefined time. Likewise, the money. Labour has plenty for cycling, planting woodlands, climate this and that, lots of endless and repeat transport studies. But as we lose hundreds of homes a year, you have no cash for this. This administration needs to sort out its priorities. Regarding the MPPF, I have written regarding the farrago that led to this urgent item, the entirely inadequate officer report, and the fact that no substantive draft response has been submitted for discussion. Of course, it's too late now for anything meaningful, but I would like one issue submitting somewhere. Under the Conservative Lib Dem government, they decided that flats and rooms in student blocks could be counted in various configurations as homes in terms of housing completions. I have asked repeatedly, and I know they are available, for the last 10 years, how many numbers and proportion of our housing completions are in fact student blocks for ever expanding universities. Between a third and a half in some years, I understand, meaning the few completions we have each year are significantly overcounted in practical terms. Can this comment be added to that student blocks are not counted as homes? I know that means we will need to build even more, but there should be at least an honest and realistic accounting of homes built. This Labour government should rectify that undercounting at least. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The second speaker is Flick Williams, who I believe is joining us online. Are you there,
Good
Flick?
evening.
Yeah, thank you, Flick. We've got you there. I'm told that you don't need a notice on time, so if you just start speaking when you're ready, we'll pick up from there.
I really need 3 hours in a training room to properly explain this, but 3 minutes it is. This city, like every other in the country, operates a form of social apartheid when it comes to the built environment. Even things I expect to be accessible are often not. Take the exhibition of street art held in June. I was turned away at the door because the lifts were switched off. A cultural event open to the public, except if you are disabled. Next time you walk around the city, just look at all the businesses that a wheelchair user cannot visit with you. But that's just how it is, isn't it? No, the status quo was arrived at one decision at a time, starting when disabled people were not an accepted part of society or the community, segregated away, warehoused in long-stay institutions. But the difference is those authorities that have an SPD on accessibility are addressing it and using that weight to force necessary change. For example, requiring every application for change of use to ensure level access at entry to the business, exempting only listed buildings. What are we doing? Still allowing the building of retail units with a raised threshold, see Piccadilly. So this is big picture stuff. This is above and beyond arguing about that accessible toilet or those blue badge spaces. I know this council collectively doesn't get it, but if it did, the SPD on accessibility would not only be higher than 13th in the league table of priorities, it would tick every box for core commitments and council plan priorities, not just equalities and health and well-being. For example, economy and good employment, education and skills. Disabled people can neither learn nor get a job in a building that is inaccessible to them. Only a firm commitment to access contained within an SPD has the force behind it to slowly change the systemic disadvantage and oppression that disabled people face in our society. Housing is a major part of it too. Research shows that living in accessible accommodation makes it far more likely for someone to be able to both enter and remain in the labour market. So where is the commitment to require M42 and M43 units from developers? I reject paragraph 10 of the report as wholly inadequate. I can guarantee that accessibility will not feature as a cross-cutting theme because of the widespread lack of understanding of inclusive design and its importance. Take, for example, the climate change SPD. Much of that will be the very antithesis of accessibility. We've already seen it with planning applications that accept things like revolving doors without alternative entrance that are against British Standard 8300 guidance on access. This is the manifestation of eco-ableism, putting net zero above living people. There can be no climate justice without social justice. Where are those who should be championing equalities, not watching over this business as usual relegation to the bottom of the heap? Thank you.
Thank you, Flick. I'm sure members will take that into account as they go forward. I'll ask at this time if Alison, the officer, would like to join us at the table as we move on to the next item. There's one item 4, but I'll just cover the fact that we also have 2 additional items under urgent business, which are the reforms to the National Planning Policy Framework and the consultation and verbal update on the local plan examination. So we in essence have 3 items, substantive items to cover tonight. And I will just remind us before we get on to item 4 that this is a kind of cross-party working group for policy development. So if we can keep it focused around policy development rather than political approaches to policy, then that would be ideal. Thank you. Item 4 is prioritising the supplementary planning documents. Alison Cook will take us through this in a second, but just to note it before you could put in your presentation, this is around prioritising the supplementary planning documents. Each planning document will have its own review and consideration process. So if we can keep questions around how we prioritise it rather than the granular detail of each item, that would be helpful to moving that on. Sorry, a question from yourself, Councillor.
No, slightly different though. I wasn't aware there was going to be a separate item on the local plan, in which case I need to declare an interest as one of the objectors to it.
Yes.
On behalf of various organisations. So I will leave for that item.
Yeah, it's the last one, so that'll probably work well. Thank you. Yeah, Alison, if you want to take us through the presentation, please.
Thank you, Chair. So today I'm presenting this report on prioritising supplementary planning documents. What we're asking, as Councillor Burton has set out, is to recommend from this group to recommend to executive to approve the prioritisation of SPDs as set out in the report. Our starting point for consideration of this list and the higher priorities SPDs has been previous exec decisions on this matter, where we have already identified 3 SPDs as higher priority, and those 3 are climate change, affordable housing and green infrastructure. It was left to subsequent committee a subsequent executive from January 2023 decision for a group for executive to prioritise the next phase of SPDs, and that's where we are with this report. As you will see, we are now recommending that the scope of the affordable housing and green infrastructure SPDs, the scope of those are revised, and we want to widen out the affordable housing SPD to include all housing policies. So we have one comprehensive SPD covering all housing policies. And for the green infrastructure SPD, we want to split some of those, some of the inclusion of policies between those relating to more flora and fauna and those relating to human health, such as open space, which will fall into the healthy places SPD, which we're also recommending as higher priority. And the last it's a new recommendation to produce that healthy places SPD as a higher priority. And the second higher priority one that's new would be to deliver a gypsy and traveller and travelling show people SPD, which will focus around design, which we've set out in Annex C as part of that scope. Just to also bring in that we received an e-petition, as I set out at paragraph 44 regarding the HMO thresholds and how we deal with the HMO SPD as part of this process. That e-petition was received in March this year, and we're now recommending that the detail of the HMO SPD, which should be updated, would be included in the housing SPD, given that the policies the policy direction for thresholds is set out now in the local plan. So just to recap on in terms of just making sure there's a shared understanding of what SPDs are, we use these as a planning tool to read alongside the local plan to add clarity and detail to the policy approach that we've set out in policy. And many local authorities take this approach to make sure that policy can be applied consistently, and it's helpful to both internal and external interpretation, which we also think will be helpful to in terms of efficiency, as we're often giving policy advice in around how certain policies work or what is expected from third parties that want to put an application into the development services. So we think there's an efficiency to this as well in terms of officers' technical knowledge. So they can build on those policy approaches, but there has to be a hook in that policy for them to be taken forward, and they cannot set out new policy. So the scope that we have included at Annex C goes to each of those policies that we think will likely be included in those SPDs and what the likely scope is against that policy of where we could take the guidance. There is, I've set out at paragraph 57, the differentiation therefore with other guidance that may be produced, and we outline that there may be complementary subjects which are not directly covered by planning policy in the local plan, and we think do not therefore require an SPD, but may benefit from further guidance. And we're already working on some of these. We've recently taken this approach to, for example, developer contributions, where we've updated our web pages online as developer guidance, and it's signposting to existing information, but in a more clear way, but still drawing in and relevant to the local plan policy approach. In terms of the process for undertaking an SPD, it's sort of in future, following the sort of prioritisation agreement and decision, we will be where SPDs are agreed to be taken forward, they will need to follow a legislative process as set out in legislation. This includes a statutory 6-week consultation period, which would be citywide, and we'd hold that in accordance with our statement of community involvement. And that is all, we would be agreeing as part of that process a consultation strategy with our executive member as of when appropriate. We've set out in recommendation 7 that each SPD is reported prior to executive, prior to and post statutory consultation for consideration and ultimately adoption as part of the development plan for the city. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. I'm happy to, I won't break it down into every individual SPD one at a time. So I'm happy to open the floor, but as we see how questions come, we might need to try and drive this in one direction or another so that we can try and get questions in some kind of manageable approach. But if anyone has any specific questions on what's been presented there, or to get an idea on, Councillor Merritt, and then I'll.
Yeah. Can I just ask about paragraph 16 and the implications of what's mentioned there in terms of the Act, the 2023 Act, and obviously other changes that might come from the new government. What is the likely timescale to when a formal notification is issued of the council's intention to commence plan making under the new regulatory regime, and how does that interact with the timetable for the different SPDs that you're proposing?
If I start and then, yeah, so we haven't yet got a clear timetable from government, and obviously the NPPF is being consulted on, and we're really keen to hear everyone's thoughts on that today. We are still in a transition. There's a transition arrangement for the current local plan, and that will continue on its journey, if you like, to adoption. And these SPDs relate to that local plan. So we will have a period of time, essentially, at some point in the not too distant future, where we have an adopted local plan and a series of SPDs that support those policies within that local plan, whilst we are also in the process of essentially refreshing that local plan to take into account any of the policies that are made regulatory through the NPPF. But at the moment, we haven't got timeframes for any of that. Alison?
No, absolutely. Just to add to that we are expecting transitional arrangements to be put in place for SPDs as well. But as Claire says, we haven't got notification of that yet. We are aware that the government are continuing to consider the revisions set out under the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act.
Sorry, supplementary, Councillor.
Yeah, that led directly on to the question I was going to ask, because that wasn't how I understood it from reading the documents for the second one. The suggestion is that if that was to pass with the NPPF changes as written, there would be an almost immediate review of the local plan as is, which is why I was going to ask the question. This paper suggests 2 to 3 years to the development of SPDs, and struggling in terms of resources to do that. If the NPPF changes come in, I suggest there will be no resources to do any of these SPDs, and all of that resource will be taken up in reviewing the local plan as per the new NPPF guidelines. So they wouldn't sit concurrently. You would kind of have that, and then we would go back to the beginning and start again.
You're absolutely right to raise that considerable pressure on the team. So as well as we will have at some point an adopted local plan, and we hope to have an adopted local plan in the next few months. We haven't yet got clarity from government about what immediate means. So you're right to say that as soon as the local plan is adopted, if it is after a new national policy and planning framework has been adopted, which we believe it will be, we will be pushed into a refresh process. The length of time that refresh process needs to start is still up for debate, and we've heard everything from immediate, like the next day, to starting within 18 months. That gives us a small window of actually finishing off those SPDs. But you are right to note that actually there will be considerable increased pressure on the strategic local planning team and the strategic and the planning development team sitting next to Alison. And we still need to do that impacting. And it's really difficult for us to understand the resources required because the NPPF is still in consultation. So we're not entirely sure how much of it will be taken forward, given that, of course, it's not just all of your views that we're very keen to hear. There will be other local authorities gathering their own members' views throughout the course of the next 6 weeks, something like that. Less than that, 4 weeks. 3 weeks, gets worse.
So is it a supplementary, Councillor Pavlovich?
Less a supplementary question, more of an observation, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think Councillor Eyre makes the incredibly valid point, and as you've pointed out, we don't know until we hear back from the inspectorate what their expectations of us are. We're working on the assumption that the plan will be found sound, and that we'll be able to then proceed to adoption by full council. However, it may be that there are clauses within the inspector's statement that require one or more areas to be reviewed more quickly. Equally, we don't know yet what the expectations of authorities are in respect of the review, as Claire's pointed out. It may be that the preparation of supplementary planning documents has to be subordinate to the requirement for a local plan review. It may be that we can do one or more supplementary planning document at the same time as a review. However, much of that will depend on the scale of the review. If we're required to do a review very early, and whether we have sufficient resources to take on big pieces of work. The climate change SPD is well progressed, and Alison will talk more about that. The scoping of the next tranche of SPDs is partly what we're here to talk about today, but has been set with an expanded remit. So that in and of itself will be quite a substantial piece of work. Sorry, Alison, I didn't mean to say anything that you wouldn't have already told me.
Perfect. You are correct. We are well advanced with the climate change SPD. We are partly advanced with some of the housing elements as well in terms of housing policy. But I agree with yourself and Claire, Councillor, regarding resourcing, and that's the thing we would need to pick up.
Just whilst we're on resourcing, and not to be the voice of doom, of course, every local authority is going to be after additional planning resource pretty much at the same time. So how the government are going to manage that with multiple local authorities after very scarce and very expert resource across the whole country, I'm not yet sure. But again, that's something we're feeding into the consultation.
Thanks. So is that a supplementary or no? That's fine. Councillor Taylor, please.
Thanks, Chair. I do have two questions, but should we see how the first one goes before you decide whether you stick with me? Because everyone might have a supplementary, you see.
Yeah.
So first one's about this resource pressure, which is obvious and has been articulated a lot in the paper and quite a bit already tonight. I'm wondering if it's maybe this work already happens to the extent that it possibly can, but looking at other local authorities and similar kind of SPDs that they've worked on that we might be able to pick up and adjust to fit York. I'm guessing local authorities across the country aren't reinventing the wheel every single time they do an SPD on a particular subject. So can we basically take the initial work that other councils do as a starting point for ours and then making it fit York as a means to save time and resource? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Where we don't need to reinvent the wheel, I don't think we would go, we would do. Where we would need to make sure that our SPDs are locally specific is where is ensuring that they fit with our own specific policies and local plans. So
Yeah.
all local plan policies may differ slightly, although they cover similar subjects across local authorities, and we'd need to make sure that that tailors to us. But we'd certainly be looking at a best practice exercise and gathering examples and using examples where possible to relate to best practice and use that in our own SPDs to expedite production.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, cheers, Chair. Second question relates to the list of priorities, and I'm drawn to the accessibility SPD, and if I'm honest, slightly disturbed by how there's only sort of 2 boxes ticked for that along the list of core commitments and council plan priorities. I mean, even transport isn't ticked for that, so I'm just trying to, how are we as a council justifying that? Because in my view, it'd be very easy to tick every single one of those boxes for accessibility. That's not just to sound good, I genuinely believe that. So why have we only got 2 along there?
So we have covered accessibility, and we are intending to cover accessibility across all reports. I think the way that I've done that table is to reflect that we're not actually intending to produce an SPD directly and solely focus on accessibility. At the moment, we're saying that that would come, and we've scoped it into the housing SPD under in Annex C, which is under housing mix. So we're looking at it from a housing perspective initially, but we've also said that we would scope it in as a cross-cutting theme across, and I note the speakers, Ms Williams is quote of paragraph 10 in relation to how we said that we would be a cross-cutting theme across all SPDs. So we would likely include our understanding of accessibility and how it can influence that at each stage. But at this point in time, that compatibility was in relation to not having a separate SPD itself. But I'll pass on to Becky as well.
Just from obviously my side of things, the DM side and the building regs side of things, that obviously runs through the planning application side and the building regulation side. So it's a theme throughout the planning service, but it's specifically not more picks up, that's the wrong way to put it. It's an intrinsic part of the planning application, the building regulations. So in terms of an SPD, from a planning point of view, we already have the sufficient, so say for example, in your planning committee reports, in the vast majority of them now, they now have a public sector equality section in there. We've introduced that. You've got your building regs, they've been changed. There's the updated ones that come in October this year. There are other ways through the planning and building regs process that the accessibility is absolutely paramount.
Just to reflect back what Ellison and Becky have said, it basically covers your point, councillor, in that accessibility should tick all the boxes. And I wonder if actually we need to strengthen the paragraph around how accessibility is reflected against all of the SPDs above, to make that a lot clearer, so that actually it answers the public participant and it answers Councillor Taylor's comment, because it's just exactly what you've just said. So yeah, thanks.
We can propose some further detail to advise executive on Thursday. We can advise a further wording on to that effect for executive on Thursday. And just to note as well that I didn't actually just cover that at paragraph 69 in relation to accessibility in design. We are working with the Access Forum on some guidance as a design checklist for planning as well, which is again complementary to the housing SPD and is likely to be an annex to that document.
Or is that a supplementary?
Yeah, and then I mean, I think we'll probably come back to this a bit in this meeting. So, I mean, I think I understand the answers, but I'm still not clear on why those boxes haven't been ticked. And box ticking is box ticking, but in this case, it matters in terms of the prioritization. So I hear your answers, but I don't think I'm yet informed on why we're not ticking at least more boxes, if not all of them, for accessibility. And I'm guessing focusing on this because council did vote to have an SPD on accessibility when we did the social model motion. So, you know, I appreciate what officers are saying, but members have given a strong steer. It was almost, I think it was a unanimous vote. If it wasn't unanimous, it would have been one abstention, Councillor Waters probably. So yeah, why aren't all of those boxes ticked? Why are we deciding that accessibility isn't necessarily relevant to the transport council plan priority? That's just one example. Clear that conversation must have happened internally before this paper has been put together.
I don't think we're saying it's not relevant. I think we're saying that the transport, the sustainable transport SPD, which is fourth down and has the equality box ticked, that has an accessibility element to it. So what we've done is we've embedded it in the other SPDs. But what you're saying is that actually it almost needs a cross-cutting accessibility SPD that pulls out those paragraphs from the other SPDs to create one accessible SPD that is reflected in the others. Is that right? So sort of a matrix. I
think where I'm probably going with this, seeing as you've asked me, I will respond and I'll let other members chip in. Is that I note the paragraph on cross-cutting and how we're going to try and work accessibility into all areas of SPDs, but until there's much more meat on those bones, that is literally just ink on paper. It's just another communications thing. It's another meeting document, another strategy paper that sounds nice but has no teeth. So if we had more in front of us that really hammered home how accessibility will fit into all of these different ones, you know, then I'd probably back off a little bit.
I think what us as officers are trying to say is we completely understand what you're saying and we can revise that box for you, and that is absolutely fine. But Alison and I, as your lead planners, are saying it is intrinsic. We completely understand what you're saying and we can tick those boxes. But what I'm also saying is that this is picked up through the planning application and the building regs processes. We have the hooks, we are doing it. It's not that we're not. Those boxes can be ticked. I think that's the answer to what you're wanting. But in terms of an SPD, what we're advising is, in terms of our priorities, we think that there is already things that we are doing that allows us to already ensure that accessibility is a key priority through the planning application and Alison's process, and that a specific SPD isn't required as a priority for that reason, because we've already got the hooks and we're already doing it through my side and the building regs. More importantly, the building regs is what your main hook is at the minute.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think a key question before any next final decision on this is to find out what in that motion was actually being requested to be in that SPD, because, you know, a broad accessibility SPD is a broad idea, and what's the actual policy aim of that motion? And it's making sure that that policy aim is being picked up either through one of these other SPDs, or if it's not, maybe it does need a further SPD to do it. But I think we need to understand what the actual purpose of that motion was, because a broad brush, what's an SPD? It's, you know, it could be anything, essentially. So it's making sure that we're picking up the needs of what that motion is one way or another. I think I've got a couple of supplementary. Sorry, you want to come in?
I just want to come back to the point as well that SPDs have to hang off the local plan policies. So if we consider there isn't a strong enough hook actually in the policy wording itself, we wouldn't be able to produce an SPD, even if the motion has asked us to do that legislatively. We wouldn't be able to do that. We would again go down the guidance route, which is what we've put out in our report currently.
Sorry, I think I've got a couple of supplementaries. Councillor Merritt, do you want to come in on this one?
Thank you. The supplementary I had on the accessibility issue is to pick up the question that the public speaker, Ms. Flick-Williams, raised on the M3, M4 housing, and whether that is envisaged to be covered by the housing SPD, or whether you don't have the hooks.
So we have set out in the scope under in Annex C, so under the housing SPD, we scope into the housing mix policy the potential to clarify that issue for accessibility and accessibility in plan, but we're already doing that. As Becky is going to.
So we've, as part of this process, we've looked at recent planning approvals that we've given. And we have, through both the Tadcaster Road application, we've managed to secure 7 M43, 5 of which are affordable, 2 are bungalows and 3 are ground floor flats. We've also managed to secure it at Hull Road in terms of all by the corner units at M42 and 7.4% at M43. So we are already doing it through the planning application process as much as we possibly can.
Sorry, I see a couple. Can I see which hands were supplementary to this one? So I'll come to you first, Councillor Ed.
I think it was just a general reflection on the comments that Councillor Taylor had made. I'm not sure how helpful that table actually is. I think we could spend hours all the way going around saying who should be ticking what box, like those old logic puzzles that you used to have to do with that. So I just wonder whether that just basically lose that table, because it kind of probably does more disservice than it does service. To see what you're trying to do with that, and I can see the work that's gone into it, but I think it raises more questions about why isn't something there than it actually answers in terms of why they're there.
Get that. Councillor Villiers.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I agree actually with Councillor Eyre about what's the purpose of the table and is it helping us prioritise which ones, or I can't, because I thought our each commitments, we thread that through everything. So in some ways, all of the each boxes you'd expect to be ticked for everything. And I'm looking at things like the housing one. Climate change is intrinsic to housing, for example. Building houses that are resilient to future climate. So, and the transport one cuts across so many things. So I sort of, either that table does need a little bit of revision to really reflect what it picks up, or I kind of want to know what the purpose of the table is and whether it's helping us prioritise or what it's doing there.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I don't know if you want to come back or if you just want to note that for future reports.
I'm happy to note that.
Yeah,
for future. Thank you.
Thanks. Right, I think we'll move on. Councillor Smalley, I think you were next in line.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, similar to what Councillor Villiers have just said, I agree. I think the table, particularly on the sort of culture section, sort of similar problem there. I guess my question is, you don't need to sort of have the sort of more formal planning resource in order to sort of start to have conversations with city partners about some of these SPDs. So in particular, I guess the culture one. This is probably a question for Claire. I guess what conversations have been had with sort of city partners around the culture SPD? Because I know, at least in my time, it was something that really energised the sector, and you know, hours, if not days, of my life were spent in meetings discussing it. So I guess what's the update on that? And I've got a second question as well. That's okay.
Yeah, if you want to.
So I've got so I'm just starting those conversations with partners now, Councillor Smalley. I've got a meeting with Catherine Blacker, and I've started to talk to people about the cultural quarter and about how culture might be embedded into new developments, but it's still very early days. It's probably something to bring back to a scrutiny committee on a different day. But certainly it's on the list. It is something I recognise needs to happen.
Yeah, just a supplementary, I guess, on this one. People like the Civic Trust who have resource and might be supportive of actually helping to develop SPDs. How open are we to engaging with them on actually developing policy rather than us holding all of the responsibility ourselves as an organisation? How willing are we to open up development?
I think, we're open to that conversation in relation to the SPDs. We've mentioned about co-design. So working with partners to make sure that, the SPDs are delivering the guidance and the necessary clarity that they're requesting. We've specifically mentioned it, for example, in our proposals for Gypsy and Traveller SPD, where we would absolutely work with the community to understand their specific design requirements. And if I may just supplement on the culture one, in preparing the local plan for submission and just post that, actually, we were working with partners in relation to the policy approach. And actually we were heralded as quite at the forefront of adding a cultural policy to a local plan. So I'm sure we'd like to pick up those conversations again as well about results.
Just in terms of, you know, you were talking about resource and working with others. Yes, absolutely. We will do that wherever possible, and we do now. But ultimately, they are our SPDs. So the ultimate responsibility is ours in terms of writing it, drafting it, sitting here, these kind of meetings. That's the resource issue there. It's not necessarily the working with partners. We do it. We're doing it already. You, as you said, you were doing it. Claire's doing it. It's not just that. It's the technical planning side that will be required for SPDs, where there will be the resource issue.
So I guess my second question was almost identical to what you said. I guess expanding slightly, the city has sort of fundraised with partners to get some of this stuff off the ground before. So Millennium Bridge is the council's job to provide infrastructure, but that was fundraised. Our UNESCO designation, the Media Arts one, was externally done, but sits with the council, and likewise the World Heritage one has been, I mean, the council contributed, but largely fundraised externally. So I guess we've got some really good examples of where we can do it to deliver city priorities. I guess more unsuccessful ones as well, such as free school meals, but we have done it successfully. Could you explore that as a way of making sure that these SPDs actually get off the ground earlier than in 4 years' time?
Yeah, we've got to be careful in terms of conflicts of interests as well, clearly. But the issue is that they are ultimately planning documents, and they've got to be based on planning policy. And that's where there is a difference there. So yeah, going back to what I just said, absolutely, we can work with people, but it's got to remain the planning documents that need that specialist expertise there. And I'm not saying that other places haven't got it, but ultimately it's our responsibility as CYC to do that.
Thanks. Sorry, I totally get that. I guess my point is there are probably city institutions where this funding is very small. And I know I had sort of conversations with other people. I guess my suggestion, I guess, would be to have those conversations, which I don't think have been progressed for a while, because I think they could well be a situation where they would fund an actual officer post. So the resource sits within the council. It's not external, not open to those to being open to, you know, in terms of conflicts of interest, but is actually building on a priority.
Completely get what you're saying in terms of that, and there might not have been progressed, but we have been working on trying to get a local plan adopted. So in terms of our priorities, that's what and in an ideal world, absolutely, we would go down that route, but we're not there.
I think I probably see this something more for, I take your point, and this is not at all to get you. I think it's probably more for Claire in terms of those sort of conversations at a city level and in terms of trying to get resource.
Yeah, I'll take that away, and it's a interesting thing to explore. It will need technical support, obviously, but there is a whole load of partnership conversations we need to have to co-design the kind of principles that would work across partnerships at this stage. The end point will definitely be technical resource, but remember, we've got pinch points with technical resource looming on the horizon anyway with the NPPF. So where I'm sitting right now, it needs mapping out, working out what kind of resource we need where, what kind of capabilities and what kind of capacity, and develop a resourcing model. And I'm not in the position to do that right here today. Thanks, Councillor.
Thanks. I saw a couple of hands during that. Were either those supplementary or separate? Thanks. I'll add to the list. Next one was, I think, Councillor Mellett. Do you have another point to raise?
Yes, sorry. It was partly supplementary to my original. I'd just like to understand the trade-off between completing the existing draft, the draft SPD you've been doing on housing, and going for the much bigger one. I mean, we're hoping if the local plan is adopted fairly shortly, that we may well get a lot of applications. I'd assumed the SPD was going to give the guidance on affordable housing that will help you to process all of those applications in a manageable and clear way, given that, shall we say, the local plan policies are not overly explicit in terms of how you deal with the affordable housing act. And given that, of course, is the core of the housing crisis in the city, therefore, I would assume there is an argument for trying to get that one done and in place quickly versus trying to do the much more comprehensive one that's the alternative in this paper. So I'd like to understand the trade-offs there. You know, how valuable is the SPD on affordable housing to getting the right results over the next 2 years?
I'll ask Alison to sort of answer the question in terms of what stage it's at and what else we might need to take it forward. Bear in mind, the local plan hasn't been adopted yet, so we don't actually have any live policies. But the purpose of today is to understand from you all what your priorities are. So you've definitely made a case for affordable housing, and it'd be interesting to hear from other councillors whether that is indeed your number one priority, because actually understanding SPD priorities will also help us for those ones that aren't underway already.
Yes, so we have advanced in the background alongside the local plan policy, so that when we submitted the local plan policy in 2018, it has evolved through the examination process to be updated, and as part of that, we've been working with our colleagues in housing and the affordable housing team to make sure that we capture how those changes need to be incorporated in SPD. So some of the affordable housing work has progressed, but alongside that, we understand the needs for the other policies as well. I don't think there would be a significant time delay in coming forward with the more comprehensive SPD, as we come back to the nature of those SPDs, which is clarifying the planning policies that we have. So in that respect, that's why we've widened it out at this current stage. But clearly, we would need to reflect on the inspector's reports and the adopted local plan policies to see what any further revisions they've made. But we have a good idea of the modifications that have been put forward on those policies already, and have been working in the background to make sure that we understand what would need to go in the SPD for clarification purposes.
Councillor Pavlich, do you want to come in on this?
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the things that I'd just like Alison to clarify is the connection between, for example, HMOs and HMO thresholds, short-term holiday lets, design standards, as they relate to affordable housing. You can, if you just have one element, which is the overall quantum of affordable housing, is it important? Certainly, the argument is it important to also incorporate those other elements that impact on affordable housing numbers, including issues such as viability and other areas, which is why you suggested incorporating it and previously brought that to committee.
Yes, absolutely. So it's important to remember, I think, on that point, Councillor Pavlich, that the local plan needs to be read as a whole. So in doing so, we haven't taken, a sequential approach, for example, to policies in the local plan. And as such, we think that presenting a comprehensive housing SPD with incorporating all the relevant policies would make sure that the visibility of all those policies is raised and clarified at the same time. I think that, and it's about reading those policies as a whole, and making sure that plan, the whole plan is clarified when necessary.
Councillor Arrow.
How we feel that housing fits into those. I think it would be a high priority, and that we need that. But also we need it in terms of affordable housing and 106 commitments to that, and how that impacts on the 106 agreements that we will make in the future.
Certainly, as part of that, SPD would be clarifying any requirements for developer contributions and how that fits in with the schedule. And notwithstanding that, we'll also be moving forward with our community infrastructure levy once we have an adopted plan as well, and we will be able to submit that for examination, which would be another mechanism for securing developer contributions.
Thanks. Is that a supplementary on this? Sorry. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Can I ask how long you think it might be before we get the housing, the wider housing the wider housing policy in place, and therefore whether it could or couldn't actually also pick up the STHL, or is that out of the question because there's a lack of hooks in the local plan?
So in terms of timescales at the moment, the most progressed is the climate change SPD that's been undertaken by consultants. So I'd see that coming forward in the new year. You know, as soon as we're able to confirm the adoption of a local plan, we'll be moving forward with the consultants on that basis. So I'd assume that would come forward early next year. The housing is also in housing SPD, we can progress. And like I say, elements of that have progressed already. So I would expect that we would be able to bring that back to this committee next year. And maybe early summertime, I would say, for consideration, early doors for consultation purposes, and obviously subject to that consultation, the responses received, potentially we'd be able to, if it was high priority, prioritise that for the end of the year, subject to how that moves forward. In terms of the short-term lets, I've set out in paragraph 70 of the report that we're currently awaiting the legislation position following a consultation by the previous government administration on short-term housing lets. They have confirmed that they're going to, previously it was confirmed they were going to introduce a licensing regime, and that they would put out also secondary legislation in relation to planning, so around use class and giving short-term housing lets its own use class. We need to really look at how that is coming forward, because it will influence how we plan for the future. Obviously it forms part of our housing mix potentially, and we'd need to look at that evidence and see whether it fit into or could support at a future date the policies and the plan, but we really need that legislative approach, which is why we've set out at the moment under recommendation 10 that we, members agree to continued evidence gathering ahead of the introducing the changes at this point in time, and that we can reflect on that and bring that back essentially for discussion once we know more about how that's going to be introduced.
Sorry, Councillor Eyre, you had a supplementary on this, and I'll say something.
Yeah, I probably should have asked this question first, and I might have saved us all an hour. So I think what I've got from this conversation is that those 3 SPDs mentioned in paragraph 27 are in progress. I think you alluded at the beginning to, you just said the housing one's probably going to be a year to get that, which means the third one, green infrastructure, will be another year after that probably. So even with the existing resources, we will struggle to get those 3 through in the next 2 years. Given it would be quite a radical approach for this committee and executive to say, well, actually our priority is to ditch all the ones that we're in the middle of and start 3 different ones. I suspect the answer to Claire's question about what is the priority is we finish the ones we're in the middle of. And if we're lucky, we might just have enough resource to get that done. We may not. So that's just, if I said that at the beginning, we could have not had the debate on what the priority was.
So as set out on the recommendations that we were making to executive, we are asking to continue to prioritise climate change, significantly advanced, it's funded, that will come forward first. We're asking for agreement to revise the scope of the housing and the green infrastructure SPDs, but continue essentially the production of those. And then the 2 further ones, which is planning for health or healthy places SPD, and the gypsy and travelling show people SPD would be next in priority.
Yeah, just in terms of, for putting him on this one, in terms of what we think is important for me, if we are in a position where we get progress on the short-term lets, I think putting it into the housing one, because it doesn't feel like it's going to be a major policy on its own because of the kind of limited scope that we'll have in a local plan already. Anything that we can put into housing SPD would probably be beneficial, would be my view. because we're going to have limited powers anyway, based on what we've got in the LP. Yeah, Councillor Merritt.
I'd certainly echo that, Chair. As a Guildhall councillor, we are losing residences hand over fist. If you actually look at what's happened over the last 7 years, we have lost the equivalent of 3 years housing supply. And if that, continued loss extends, it's severely undermining the key function of the local plan to provide enough adequate housing for our own residents.
So is that a supplementary to this? No, I've got you on. Don't worry. There's a few to go. It's on the way. We'll move on. Oh, sorry. Do you want to? Yeah, if we can, we'll pick it up at the end before we vote on the recommendations. But yeah, remind me. I'll forget. Councillor Fenton, please. Next, you had a question. Then I've got Councillor Bassey and Councillor Stewart. Is anyone else waiting? Sorry, Councillor Ellis as well.
Thank you, Chair. Just I suppose a quick one, just for clarification. We sort of heard about accessibility being a theme running through all the SPDs. There's a plan for a new planning for health SPD. I wanted to make sure that it's not the result of stripping out the health aspects from other SPDs, but is more of a bringing those aspects together, which I'm guessing that's what it is. I just wanted to confirm my understanding as to what that will do, and it will not sort of denude the other SPDs of health aspects, which are pretty fundamental.
Right.
Alison, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I can respond on that. Health Places SPDs come about through support from working with our colleagues in public health, in actual fact. They're really driving it. And in response particularly to policy HW7, which requires that we do health impact assessments for strategic sites. Obviously, we've got those coming forward now. So we effectively miss the boat if we don't get on with providing this SPD for how to do a health impact assessment. So that's driven that, and it's quite specific to that policy, and then including some elements about open space, looking at our evidence base for open space, and then other impacts of the health considerations will just kind of run through other SPDs, but the Healthy Places SPD will be quite specific on those topics.
Yeah, Councillor, sorry, supplementary.
Yes, my question was about health. So it's something I've been going on about for ages in terms of planning and everything. It's something that is really important to me. My concern around this is obviously we can put into the SPD what those contributions to health need to be, which, as with any development, is the increased need off the back of it. That doesn't satisfy the problem. So we've had quite a few come through planning now, which says, well, yes, this will generate 60 spaces at a GP surgery, therefore the GP surgery needs to expand. We'll take £40,000 towards a new GP surgery. But that's then a health issue in terms of actually locating a GP surgery willing to expand and able to do it. What is the risk to us of losing that contribution? As I know we have done in section 106, if we're not able to use it over a period of time, will SPD lead to us basically accumulating a lot of money for GP places, dentist places that we can't provide, and then having to give it all back?
I think whilst we'll cover conditions and developer contributions as part of that, I think that the main focus of that SPD is around the healthy place policy. So it's the place shaping of it, and how we deal with the health impact assessment, which we want to ensure is done upfront for development, to set the principles of how healthy places should be enacted as part of that development proposal, and then reported on and evaluated against those principles to make sure they're embedded. In terms of contributions, as they, S106 contribution is going to need to satisfy the relevant requirements for that in terms of being justified, which would be through the development management process where necessary. And we'll be moving on to the SIL process, where we'll be able to start to apportion that pot against various delivery of infrastructure as necessary. We obviously are reliant as well on an evidence coming forward and working with our health partners. in terms of demonstrating their need and their and how that can be progressed in terms of delivery as part of their strategy. And you know, they're already a consultee as part of the development management process where necessary to record with that.
So it's specific policy HW5 on page 59 is the one that's about the provision of new and enhanced primary secondary care. I think what I was trying to get at was with most of the other things, sports provision, for example, that's something that we're used to and something we can sort of take the lead on, and it's within our gift to find an extra, well, not always, but it's easier for us to find an extra football pitch and put football pitch and those sort of things in. It's not within our gift to provide primary and secondary healthcare services. So it was specifically about that, whether we risk not getting that brought forward in terms of developers contributing their bit and the NHS coming along and saying, well, actually, we haven't got the 250k that we need to deliver.
I'll go to Alison first and then Diona.
So I think part of the work we're doing is, so the NHS and Public Health, I understand, are currently working at their evidence base about where they have capacity, lack of capacity in things like GP surgeries, and trying to map that in a way that's useful to us, useful to developers, so we know where the need is. And they're providing the evidence base that will link from the SPD just to identify that. When a developer's looking at a site, they'll be able to click through effectively and find out where the need is for capacity. And then we will all know where the developer contributions are needed. I mean, it all changes obviously when we get to SIL because it's all going into a big pot anyway. So it will be fairly short term.
It's just that problem. We have got got much better at it, and the identified need, the evidence base is all there. But the pushback from the NHS is always, well, we've got no money. So the papers we've had coming to planning is saying basically there's a requirement for so many GP surgeries, GP spaces, that's going to cost £400,000. Developer, you're contributing 50. And then that's the end of the matter because the NHS hasn't got the 350 to match fund it. So it's just how we make sure we don't, whatever we can do to make sure we don't lose that at least 50,000.
Yeah.
In the mix.
I think, sorry, like, go on, you go.
Yeah, so as you know, we've got the joint committee that we're working with, the Integrated Health and Care Board, the Place Partnership, and we're having, so in my partnership role, I'm working with them as well on essentially an estate strategy and an investment vehicle. So it's not solely reliant on developer contribution, although developer contribution plays a huge role, but also looks at the broader estate, whether it's in the right places, what kind of assets they've got, what kind of assets we've got, whether we can find a investment partner, etc., etc. So all that work is coming together, informed by the evidence base Alison's talking about, and as part of the health infrastructure that supports the soon to be adopted local plan. We'll have to do exactly the same piece of work if we're talking then about a refreshed local plan, but that's where we are at the minute.
Thanks. Next person I had was Councillor Vassie, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm probably in a minority in that I didn't find table 1 confusing or upsetting at all. All I saw was a vertical list of SPDs, and then across the top, a list of our core commitments and council plan priorities, and assumed if we want to change those and add ones, we can do it. Was that a correct understanding? If we want accessibility to feature all the way down, we simply have to put it into the council plan priorities. Is that correct?
Yes, I'd be happy to amend that and happy to reflect on that as appropriate from members. I've certainly labelled the table as indicative at this stage and happy to refine it as part of this process or for executive recommendation on Thursday.
Thank you. Yes, that's how I read it. It didn't upset me particularly. I'd like to raise issues about the green infrastructure annex. I was confused. I'm delighted to see that Strensall Common is a special area of conservation and going to get special attention. What I found slightly weird is that York's got loads of special areas of conservation and triple SIs, and I was a little confused as to why this one is featured and why there isn't a more general strategic approach for the whole city. Sorry, I should say it's on page 62.
No, thank you. We cover the other, so through the local plan examination, we developed a new policy directly for Strengthsville Common in relation to the harm that would be caused in relation to recreational pressure, in accordance with the uplift of increase of development in the localised area. And that was seen to need and warrant a new policy to make sure that that approach was very clear. And that is a proposed modification in the plan. So this would expand on that policy directly, so as a new policy. It doesn't mean that we are focusing on that one solely above any others. Again, in the spirit of reading the plan as a whole, all statutory or identified nature conservation designations are identified under policy GI2. So GI1 actually in this paper, forgive me, should be called green infrastructure. It's in green infrastructure under GI1, and it's also relevant to policy GI2 under biodiversity and access to nature. All of those would be covered as part of that. So we've highlighted that policy specifically because it is a separate policy now in the local plan.
Right, okay, but so all the other SACs and SSSIs are all going to be part of the green infrastructure?
Yeah,
SPD.
Absolutely, and they continue to form an evidence base for the overall local plan process and policy decisions.
And can I kind of develop that point,
Yeah.
Chair, just quickly? The whole green infrastructure and energy, I may not have seen this, but certainly in the other document, there was huge mention of solar power and onshore wind. And we hear a lot of talk that I didn't see anything about other things like geothermal energy as part of how we see green infrastructure. And would I be right in saying that a green infrastructure SPD will be used to inform the applications that developers submit to demonstrate that they're making use of local energy, local renewable energy? And if that's so, shouldn't things like geothermal energy be included in any map of green infrastructure?
I think we're bringing in NPPF, the refreshed NPPF, which sets out some of the expectations around renewable energy. But you're right, it only focuses on solar and wind, I think.
Yeah.
It doesn't talk about hydrogen or geothermals, and we've picked that up as part of the consultation anyway. But again, your comments around NPPF proposals would be really helpful because we'll feed that in as well. Do you want to pick up on the current green infrastructure?
Yes, of course. So the way that we're dealing with that would likely fall under the climate change SPD, because the climate change SPD deals with the delivery of renewable and low carbon energy generation and storage, sustainable design, construction of new development, and decentralized energy networks, which is the 3 climate change policies in the local plan. And in line with what we're saying about cross-cutting themes, where relevant, we'd include some things. So we can have a look at that in advance to make sure that's a theme that's included around well in that SPD.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as we pass the hour mark, I'm not a great deal further on in the council overall's priorities, or indeed individual members' priorities. And from my point of view, we've got sort of 4 things as we look at these, which is what matters most as an issue. So presumably everyone would agree that housing would matter more than the subdivision of dwellings. You know, clearly one is more significant than the other. But then it's how we can influence these things. You know, what tangible difference can we actually make? It's where we are in the process, in terms of, as Councillor Erra said, there's no point starting again. And also it's about the time these things would take. You know, if something has been superbly done by another council and we can broadly copy that work and do it in a matter of 30 hours and it can have an impact, that will clearly be a better use of time than if we're going in, step into the unknown, hundreds and hundreds of hours, and it wouldn't have a particular impact. So my thought would be that we have to be ultimately, where Councillor Eyre said in his, I think, 3rd or 4th of his 8 sets of remarks, which is that the fundamental is we've got to start from where we are, which is, you know, when these things are well advanced, that needs to be where we are. But the point I would like to understand better is the time that, you know, involved in developing these things. Because for example, developer contributions is something that really interests me. And I think if we're going to, and in the context of the local plan and these SPDs essentially being never ending, they're going to be evolving, aren't they, over time? We're always going to be doing another local plan and we're always going to be adding things and everything like that. Developer contributions to that, I think would be great to get right and have that as the bedrock, you know, because that's millions and millions of pounds that we can't backdate and we can't backdate processes. So those are my 2 points really about, you know, fundamentally we do have to start from where we are rather than rewriting things. But secondly, it would just be useful when we talk about finite resources, just to understand, you know, how many hours, you know, council staff think that these things would take, you know, whether their time or partners' time.
In terms of time, it's difficult to equate time in preparation, given that each one is going to be different. I think it is reliant on the resourcing and how we work with the technical team. So we are reliant, and you know, we've set out in the annex which technical teams across the council we'd be reliant upon for their input as well. So I think maybe there's an exercise there, coming back to what Claire said around resourcing, that we would need to do further scoping to help inform that process. For example, with the climate change SPD, we've been working with the consultants. That's quite intensive when we get, you know, documents through and drafts or consideration of that. But again, we'll speed up when we're able to confirm the policy approach. Everything will speed up when we confirm the policy approach following adopted plan. But again, the more resource we have input into the team, the more we're able to deal with the challenge of dealing with them more quickly. In terms of the, just coming back to the developer contributions one specifically, we'll have more understanding of that process once we get through our CIL examination as well. So that will pick up and help to clarify immediately for developers how much they will need to put into the process as part of that adoption of the CIL. And CIL will come back, so we'll go through the examination process, like I say, hopefully early next year following adoption of the local plan and confirmation of the policies that are applicable, and we'll be able to bring that report back fairly shortly after that to say what we'll be implementing as part of developer contributions specifically.
Councillor Merritt, sorry, supplementary.
Obviously, the main focus is on the priorities, but you know, there is that secondary issue behind this. What's the resource availability? And you know, given that the local plan and delivery is going to be absolutely key to a lot of the mayoral priorities on housing, on transport, and all the rest of it, I just wonder what the scope might be for seeking some supplementary funding from the mayor to accelerate the ability to deliver these SPDs, particularly if there's if they're going to be weakened in due course by the subsequent legislation. There must be a strong argument to get them in place before that, or at least so far on that they don't get sacrificed. And linked to that, I also wanted to ask about the transport one, which is at the moment is in the sort of next phase. Can I ask, you know, are you in a fairly robust position when the local transport plan is to cope without having an SPD in place? Or should that also be a priority? I'm just conscious that, you know, developments and their design make an enormous difference to the transport pattern that is generated by new developments. So, you know, the role of an SPD in trying to ensure that we get new developments that are designed to maximise active travel, public transport use, the provision of local facilities that minimise the need to travel are absolutely crucial to meeting our climate change objectives. So, you know, that is another one to me that personally I would see as a higher priority, should be in that sort of top category. And is that something that, again, might be worth approaching the mayor to see that we also cover at the same time?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Merritt. I tried to send an email to Alison whilst we were talking about resources to say, oh, might get some mayor funding. I think a conversation with the Mayor Combined Authority is definitely a starting point, starting place. You'll know in NPPF revised consultation document, it talks about a regional spatial framework or regional spatial strategy, which is of course the Mayor's powers to look at the whole region, and us having a local plan that's adopted and then a series of policies that are clear will definitely help with that formation of that. So yeah, that's absolutely a conversation I need to have. So thank you. I have flagged that. Alongside that, we have asked the Mayor Combined Authority, and they've indicated positive noises to fund the movement and place plan. And I wonder whether, sorry, I'm pointing to Councillor Raffles down the end of the table. I wonder if actually there's a conversation around how the Transport SPD and the movement and place plan could come together, because actually thinking about new routes and new roads that are developed through developments, that obviously then has an impact on essentially our network as a whole and how different corridors fit together. So again, something I think we need to take away and have further discussions around, but not lost. So thank you.
Thanks. And Councillor Avilius, waiting patiently for you to have a question.
Thank you. I echo Dave's thoughts about the Transport SPD being really integral, because it affects every aspect of living in the city. So and those new developments have a vast and sometimes disproportionate impact on the network. But my question was actually going to be about the scope of some of our the housing SPD and the Gypsy and Traveller SPD. I'm aware that we don't have a policy around houseboats, and that living in York on a houseboat is a very different kind of environment to anywhere else, and it's quite extreme and quite a difficult environment to live in. And I think either in the Gypsy and Traveller SPD or within our affordable housing or our self-build aspect of the housing SPD, we need to specifically consider boat dwellers. And I know that other councils do that, so hopefully we can lift from other councils some of that work. But you know, our river in York is quite an extreme environment to live on, and we need to recognise the needs of those people living there and make sure that we're covering that in our policy. So my request is that that's in there somewhere.
Yes, happy to look at that. Certainly, we recommended to as a modification to the local plan to insert houseboats as part of the housing mix policy, I think it was. So we could certainly look at that between the housing SPD and the Gypsy and Traveller SPD and where it best fits.
Thanks, Councillor Vassie.
It's not a supplementary. It goes back to where I was a little while ago. Just a quick question about policy G14 in green infrastructure, page 62, Annex C, refers to trees and hedgerows. And I know that there are other local authorities that include verges as part of that area, trees, hedgerows and verges, as all part of open space, green space that needs to be protected. Is it possible to add verges to that policy G14 so that it forms a coherent explanation of open spaces and the natural assets of York?
I would need to check what the policy wording is for trees and hedgerows. I think the wording of the policy is quite specific to policy around that. However, under the general green infrastructure, where we talk about what green infrastructure we would include, it may be possible to include something in that respect.
Yeah, I think we can pick that up as part of the green. Well, when it's consulting on the green infrastructure one as well, can't we? Only get into detail of it. I've not got any hands that I'm waiting to see. In terms of what we've had from the discussion so far, I think we're talking about a change to recommendation 10, which is around the short-term lets and moving that onto housing as much as possible, where that is where we have the information available to us at the time that we're doing the housing one. And then notes to take away for officers in terms of city partnership working, external funding from the mayor, and other potential other sources of funding, transport SPD and the prioritising that, particularly in the links to the funding. I think they're the main bits I've picked up. Does anyone else have anything they want to add at this time? Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. I think given how the discussion on accessibility went, I'd like us to ask the executive to help us put some more meat on the bones, using my terminology before, and have an additional recommendation along the lines of saying, as and when every single SPD comes through, it is explicitly clear how it is acknowledging the social model of disability and the council's or councillors' members' agreement to try and address that. If we're saying that it's going to be a cross-cutting theme, I'd really like that to be nailed down and almost beyond obvious, because otherwise what will end up happening is it'll be the odd line here and there in an SPD that people can point to say, oh, look, we're doing that for the disabled people. I almost think it has to be an explicit, in this housing SPD, this is how we're addressing the social model, or any other SPD, as much as it possibly can. I don't think that jars with what officers have said, but I think it properly commits the council to doing what it says it's going to do in a much more proactive way. And I'd like the committee's support with that, but it's obviously all your call. I don't know if anyone would second it. That's my proposal. If we get outvoted, that's just the way it is.
Yeah, I think that goes to the presentation of the actual SPD itself, Councillor Taylor. So I mean, I'd be happy to consider that as we move forward and look at how we could do that explicitly as part of the production of the SPD, each SPD. Yeah, we can look at that as presentational. Yeah.
I mean, I think it seems pretty clearly supported. I don't know. Do you want it's not really an addition to the report, but a clear takeaway for that to be an action that they undertake as they're developing SPDs going forwards? Is that the request?
I think it needs to be in writing in whatever the executive receive on this later this month. And you know, I've laboured the point, but I think it goes beyond presentation, because you know the social model is a big deal, and it's gonna take various radical movements and shifts in policies across the board. But yeah, whatever works really. I'm not completely okay with the process.
Yeah, me neither. Are we clear? Sorry, Councillor Ray, if you want to come in on this.
As someone who's been around this group as long as Councillor Merritt has been, all we're actually doing is making suggestions to the executive. So we're happy to support the comments that Callum made and put forward. So Councillor Taylor put forward and sent to the executive. Doesn't need a vote or anything. It's just that was the views of the group.
It might need a vote if anyone disagrees.
I believe if you disagree, you can ask that it's recorded as your opinion, and your opinion is taken to the executive for them to then ignore you. So it's just got.
Is there any indications of wide scale dissent to this? No. Councillor Pavlovich, you want to come in?
Just to clarify that the papers for this are already published for executive on Thursday. So if Alison could incorporate that into her presentation, would that be sufficient? Well, given that the papers are already out.
Yeah, or a written update or whatever it is.
I was in there.
Sorry, Councillor Merritt.
Isn't the normal process for, in effect, an extra piece of paper goes round with what is being recommended by this meeting?
An update.
Yeah.
Piece of
So
paper.
it's not that difficult.
Well, depending on how it's taken forward. We're only making recommendations to the executive, so if they don't want to put that into that update, that's their decision, isn't it? But we're asking us that. That's it. Yeah. Right. Good. Any other points on this item? agenda item before we pull that to a close? No. Do we need a formal vote on the recommendations, or do you just, yeah,
I
after
believe
the
so.
report? Yeah,
I believe so.
so, sorry, councillor Merritt.
I think we need to be clear on what we're actually voting
Yes,
on.
yeah, that's to come, don't worry. So being asked to support the recommendations that are set out, do you want to run through them broadly? What's the change specifically around short-term letters on item 10, isn't it? And then all the items to note that we've picked up that are in the minutes.
I think it would be helpful if we also flagged the issue, our concern about the timescale issue and the resourcing issue, and the suggestion that in order to get the SPDs in place in time to be fully effective, that we suggest that they approach the mayor, given how important.
Yes, this is for delivery. Councillor.
I've just got confused myself now. Is this the same paper that's going, the exact same paper that's going to exec?
Yes, with the exception that we're asking you to recommend a report to executive, so the recommendation set out at paragraph 24.
Yeah, because that's not something we've done before. So the wording members agree the revised scope. That's not within the gift of this group to. We can note it and make comments on it, but it's always just to get, all this group does is note what's going to executive and pass on our wisdom or lack of wisdom. Therefore, the actual recommendations are for executive. So it would generally just be that we note it and forward comments onto.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So we don't need a vote. Let's go. Great. Well, we'll call an end to that agenda item. I'm going to say a quick 5-minute break, but back at 5 past the latest, please. Yes. Yeah. Mr. So we move on to item 5, which is urgent business, but as I said before, we've got 2 items of urgent business tonight. The first one is proposed reforms to the National Planning Policy Framework consultation. Just for reference on this, this is about the council's response to this, but there's still opportunity to submit to make requests, to encourage people to make requests via email as to what goes into that going forward in writing as well. So I'd take this as an opportunity to ask questions about what the NPAPF looks like, but there is obviously opportunity to take that offline in terms of actually putting forward proposals. Likewise, other responses can be made directly to government, but I will let you take it forward, Alison.
Thank you. I've got a few slides just to outline some of the detail. There's further detail in the report itself in terms of taking a factual approach to what the consultation has included. It's quite an extensive consultation. If you do look at it, there are 106 questions against the different areas. So forgive me if I'm summarising quite succinctly some of the aspects of it through this presentation. But as Councillor Burton has said, the consultation is open to all, so anyone could submit a consultation on this, a response, sorry, to this consultation to the government until the 24th of September. There is an online portal you can submit your your responses to, or I've put the email address on the screen there, and it's in the documentation at Annex A as well, in writing. But really, in terms of as a starting point, this new government administration has made clear in their, the beginning of this consultation does state that sustained economic growth is the only route to improving the prosperity of our country and the living standards of working people. And they see that changes to the NPPF and a reform of the NPPF and other planning areas is needed to really deliver on their ambition, their economic ambitions, and to build that 1.5 million homes. We are keen to stress as well that they are keen to implement quickly. So as part of the consultation, they are saying that they will be implementing post this consultation closing, they're going to be implementing by Christmas changes to the NPPF. And they are expecting, where necessary, local authorities to take immediate action, and we'll come on to where that might be relevant shortly. As we've said, the response is being considered at the executive member decision session for housing, planning and safer neighbourhoods on the 23rd of September, with a delegation, I think I've set out in the report, for final sign-off following that decision session the following day on the 24th. So to get into the nitty-gritty, local plans. So we've heard a little bit of discussion this evening around local plans and strategic planning. But what the consultation has set out is that there needs to be 100% of local plan coverage over the next 5 years. And that they are setting out some transitional arrangements for those plans that are in progress at the moment. So for York, importantly, they've set out that those are in examination, can continue. But in terms of the housing numbers, which we'll come on to, if the housing target is 200 different from that proposed in the new methodology, they are requiring an early review of the plan. So we would need to look at that as part of our post-examination scoping of the local plan. They're also, as part of that, looking to strengthen the intervention criteria. So this consultation should be read in conjunction with the ministerial statements. Both are quite clear that the Secretary of State will intervene if we do not meet some of those targets, and they're revising the criteria to that effect to make sure that can be part of their strategy for making sure there's 100% coverage. In terms of strategic development strategies at the mayoral combined authority level, we've sort of covered that in the previous item, but this is a new request. It would obviously therefore cover York and North Yorkshire, and we'd have to look at the scoping for that. But at the moment, they're sort of asking an open question of, is this a good idea? How should it be done? Strengthening existing cross-boundary mechanisms under duty to cooperate in lieu of any further guidance, and they will be releasing further guidance on how that should be undertaken in the future. There is also that continuing commitment under the review of plan making through the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act But again, we're awaiting their understanding of, we're awaiting their understanding of how they want to implement that and continue with it through secondary legislation, indeed timescales for that to be put in place. Moving on to planning for homes, there are two aspects to this. So there's a housing requirement that is now mandatory using the revised standard method that they have put together, but also changes to the 5-year housing land supply, which is associated with that target. So as you can see, I've set out there that under the new method, our target currently is 1,251, and I've set out the workings for that in Annex C to this report. The old method, we had 1,020, and our current local plan across the lifetime of the plan is looking at an average of 822 houses per annum. There are two things that are important there in terms of housing land supply. So they're requiring a 5% buffer, both in plan making and decision making housing land supplies, to make sure that we have a 5-year housing land supply to meet that target. The additional buffer of 5% would take it up to 1,314. But the reason I've bolded out the 20% is because currently, if you are not meeting your housing delivery test, which is 75% of your current target, you would have to add a 20% buffer to that overall annual figure, which gives you the 1,500 figure. So apologies, that's quite complex. So effectively, we'd be looking at 1,251 as our target, but actually we'd be adding that buffer on current performance of 1,500. Additionally, they're looking at making it a forward supply position, which means that they're not actually going to allow oversupply to be taken forward as part of the housing land supply position, which means that you would have to demonstrate a rolling 5-year housing land supply, and anything you provided over and above that would be commended, essentially to say that you've delivered more housing over and above your supply. So this is very much a floor, not a ceiling figure, as I read that. They've also removed the ability to fix our annual supply position, which means that there is a continuous remit to provide 5-year housing land supply, both for plan making and as part of informing decision making in development management when applications come forward. So there's a slight change there. And as part of sort of that whole remit, there is a strengthening of the presumptions of sustainable development. And the reason I brought it into planning for homes is because it swaps out. So currently, the presumption looks at out-of-date policies, and the presumption sort of kicks in, if you like, when you've got out-of-date policies primarily. But now they're looking to change that to supply of land. So if you don't have enough supply of land, then the tilted balance under the presumption of favourable sustainable development would be engaged, subject to exceptions in terms of some statutory designations.
Do you want to take it? Yeah, go for it.
Well, so just on that, so the way I read what you were saying, Alison, was that you get the 5% additional to take it to 13, 14, and then if you are on the naughty step, it's a further 20%. But obviously those figures are, you'd only get one of those additional buffers. Is that which is the case?
Yes, my understanding is you still only get one additional buffer,
Okay.
so the 20% would overtake the 5%. So you're effectively having another 15% on top.
Right.
Sorry. In order to how deliver development, there's a couple of things that are I would say a slightly status quo on this, which is develop brownfield land first, and that's the principle that has been employed in the existing NPPF. And then there's quite a lot of rhetoric in there around the green belt, and I'm sure everyone's seen something about that. But effectively, to go through that with you, there is now they're proposing a sequential approach to greenbelt release. So the first thing you would look at is previously developed land, so your brownfield sites effectively in the green belt, and then the new grey belt. And I've underlined it on the presentation that the the grey belt comprises of previously developed land and any other parcels and or areas of greenbelt land that make a limited contribution to the 5 greenbelt purposes. So it's more than just previously developed land. There would have to be an assessment of those areas of lesser importance or making limited contribution. And that would be then followed by, if you cannot meet your housing need or your development needs on those areas, then you'd be looking at more sustainable and the more higher performing greenbelt land that would be in that purpose. And where development is coming forward on those greenbelt sites, they're looking to introduce new golden rules for those sites, where there is at least a 50% affordable housing. That's caveated where it's viable. Where they also want to ensure that there's necessary improvements to local and national infrastructure, and also the provision of newer improvements to local green spaces that are accessible to the public. So those are the 3 golden rules that would go alongside any further greenbelt release and developments. I have inserted there sort of a 2 in a slightly different colour in terms of release. Greenbelt should be 3. Apologies for that. The greenfield. So between brownfield and greenbelt, I've just inserted greenfield because there's not mention of that, but that is an implicit part of, I would say, development and delivering development, that you would look at brownfield, greenfield, greenbelt as a sequential approach first. In terms of in advance of any further sorry, it's all right, it's me. Oh. In advance of any policy approach to and policy revisions to the greenbelt approach that would come through any local plan process, they are looking at allowing development and the greenbelt through decision making. So that would fall to development services and through the development management process. That it will not be, and the wording is, and this, that they're proposing that it will not be considered inappropriate when it comes to sustainable grey belts. So again, we're looking at those parcels of previously developed land and areas that make a limited contribution. In some respects, we are looking at that already through the process and through the very special circumstances arguments, and I would expect some part of that to continue. The proposals for Greenbelt also extend to understanding further about supporting a release of Greenbelt to meet gypsy and traveller needs, which is a change in approach at the moment. Currently, provision is inappropriate in the Greenbelt, and they're looking at alternative provisions as part of this consultation of how that could maybe change. In terms of delivering affordable homes and well-designed places, they've put a real focus on making sure we've got the right mix of affordable housing. So they've removed the requirement for 10% of total homes on major sites as affordable home ownership, and they've also removed the requirement for minimum 25% to be first homes. They put a real focus on social rented homes, and that needs to be evidenced by local need. And they are encouraging more a mix of tenures on site to meet our needs. So there's more flexibility, but also relating that back to our local need, I think, in terms of how they're looking at that. There's a new element in the proposals to consider meeting the needs of looked after children, and that has to reflect the local evidence base and be put into policy. So I would see that being scoped into any future policy or evidence base supporting the different types of housing provision we would need to make. What I would say is that there's a limited or no mention really around standards for accessible homes or changes for specialist provision in the context of this consultation. And that's something that's been raised as a point elsewhere in terms of maybe that should be going in alongside meeting the needs of looked after children as another subset. Design policy has removed is proposing to remove the word beauty and go back to being well-designed places, and that gives beauty. In the rhetoric says that the supporting wording for the consultation talks about how that's quite subjective, and actually it needs to be about well-designed places as opposed to it being beautiful. As part of that, they're also still encouraging upward extension of buildings, but they have reduced sort of how they look at, in particular, mansard roofs. And so there's a quite specific changes in terms of the wording that they're looking at in terms of design. Infrastructure and transport, they're supporting the modern economy, and as they set it out in the consultation work, this is focused in this consultation around gigafactories, data centres, freight centres and logistics to support economic growth. They're looking to widen out the inclusion of what constitutes a nationally significant infrastructure project. So that would apply to, for example, onshore renewable energy, and again, the data centres, labs, gigafactories, etc., as well as water infrastructure and projects. So that would make it more of a nationalised process, depending on the scale coming forward of those projects. They're asking for public service infrastructure. So I've included the wording here on my presentation, but around the significant weight which should be placed on the importance of facilitating new, expanded or upgraded public service infrastructure when considering proposals for development. So essentially where that can add public benefit and is required, is a change, I would say, is a strengthening and emphasis on how that would be viewed. They're asking, in terms of healthy communities, it's quite an open part of the consultation. So they're asking how to provide greater direction and clarity for promotion of health and policy, which is helpful based upon the discussion we've actually just had for the SPDs in that respect. In terms of transport, they're moving to a vision-led approach. So more rather than focusing on what has been and projecting forward, they're focusing on what the outcomes are that we want to generate and how do we get there. And that is a change in process at the moment. And the way that we calculate those impacts is also changing. So the way that we look at the different development scenarios in the transport modelling would change to more achieving that vision-led approach. It does say as well that further guidance would be necessary to implement that part of the process. Green energy and environment. So that there is a lot of increased support for renewable energy schemes across the country. They've already removed restrictions, reading together with the ministerial statement, already removed restrictions for onshore wind. And they're proposing changes to the national significant infrastructure projects to put a quantum against how much can be provided under that, and how it would sit in the NSIP regime. So for onshore wind, it'd be anything over 100 megawatts, and for solar, it'd be over 150 megawatts, which are effectively large-scale schemes that would be taken to be decided at a national level. So we would input into that process, but effectively the application for anything of that size would be decided by the Secretary of State. They're also asking, though, for more identification through policy of renewable energy sites, and that we need to provide significant weight in terms of supporting energy efficiency through applications process. So that's again falling into the decision-making side. Again, the question for climate change is there anything and how better to address that in policy? That's quite an open question. I think there's quite a bit in MPPF, the existing MPPF around this. So they're looking at if there's anything else, effectively sort of an open question of how we could support that better. And then there's only a small amount really in relation to environment matters set out in the consultation itself. So in terms of safeguarding environmental resources, they're seeking to remove uncertainty that they think has been input as part of the change that happened in December 2023 in the MPPF, to make sure that best and most versatile agricultural land is safeguarded in the development process. So it would be effectively a consideration if a site was put forward, we'd look at whether or not it was part of that criteria, and we would make a decision on that, taking that into consideration. And then they've just updated some of the technical definitions for different designations, including national landscapes. In terms of other matters that they're asking about, they are looking at proposals for planning fees and how planning fees should change. So, for example, they're looking at increasing a householder application, I think, from around £270 to £528 and asking our opinion on that. They're considering the ability for local authorities to set their own charging schedules, and also whether or not we should look at cost recovery effectively by funding wider planning services beyond that cost recovery. And then also issues relating to if national significant infrastructure projects are coming forward in a local authority, whether or not we could do a cost recovery process for that as well in terms of a fee schedule. And then lastly, they're open to the public sector equalities duty and how the impacts of all these proposals may impact any individuals or groups or businesses that have a protected characteristic. You know, I've mentioned some today in terms of, for example, their ability or their proposal changed, for example, for gypsy and traveller sites in the green belt, that would fall under, I would expect, the public sector equality duty. So that's a whistle-stop tour, I'm afraid, of the consultation process, and there's more set out in the report, and I'll let comments.
Yeah, thanks. So and then just the recommendations on this report, just to note the contents of the consultation in the report and to provide feedback to inform the council's response to consultations. So if anyone has any comments to do that, then I've got Councillor Taylor and Councillor Orr.
Thank you, Chair. Just one comment from me on this. It's with regards to the fees. I'd like the council to basically bat for the highest amount possible it can get for planning fees. It's about time we started paying for public services properly, and whatever form of words the council's response can find to capture that, I'd be very grateful for. I might be open to the idea of giving local charities a discount for planning fees, but that's as far as I'd ever want to go, really. I think it's incredible how planning departments have been doing this job and not been able to cover their costs because of the way the fees have been set. And given the state of local authority funding, we need to get everything we can. So that's the one representation I'd make on this. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Orrell.
Thank you, Chair. The report says that officers are attending national workshops. Could councillors have update reports on what they take? It's a fluid situation that government are changing things all the time. Could we have updates on what you find out at these workshops?
I was certainly looking to put an update into the executive member decision session in relation to those updates. So it is worth saying that the training for this being presented by the Ministry for Housing and Communities Local Government and the Planning Advisory Service is ongoing until the 18th of September, and indeed I'm attending one tomorrow, an all-day workshop event. So I'm very happy to put something in writing and circulate it back to the group for information.
Thank you, Chair. But further question. There's lots of things in here about what councils are supposed to do and penalties and whatever. Is there anything in there about the responsibilities of developers and house builders? For example, at the moment that they can start a development within 3 years, and some of them don't start developments for a variety of reasons. One in our patch got permission and didn't submit the reserve matters application for nearly 18 months. I wonder why. House prices have gone down at that point. So if we're going to get houses built more quickly, and I think we all want that, developers should have some responsibilities as well. Also, is there anything in about them completing developments? At the moment, they can start one and then disappear. And if the housing market drops, they'll stop building. And this has happened many times in the past. And there was an interesting discussion at planning the other night about adoption. about, and Councillor Eyre made a few points about that. There's no requirement on them to bring estates up to adoptable standard, and they can leave in limbo for years. One in Huntington, it took 20 years to be adopted. There needs to be some sort of pressure on developers to complete their developments. And finally, Chair, there's a lot of options within the saying, do you think this or do you think that? And a lot of them give councils more responsibilities, and a lot of them retain responsibility for central government. I would hope that we would want to get as much responsibility and power for local councils rather than being controlled by central government.
Yeah, thanks. Do you want to say anything on those?
Yeah, the simple answer is no. There isn't anything in terms of an onus on developers. It's just not in there. But in terms of the timescales, they are in place to allow things like discharge of conditions, because as you know, we've put a raft of conditions on these larger developments, and some of them say prior to commencement, they then take some time. So that's why they're there. It's to give sufficient time. So I would imagine there'd be a fair amount of pushback in terms of that, but there is nothing in there in terms of anything that you've mentioned.
So, Chair, could we put that into the response that we send?
Yeah,
because at the moment developers do what they like.
Yeah, I think that seems pretty supportive, so I think we'll note that. Next on the list, I had Councillor Merritt, please. And then,
I think there's an awful lot to welcome in what the government's proposing. Tackling the housing crisis, tackling some of the other problems in the system is important, and this will go a substantial way towards it. I mean, clearly, they're trying to move fast, and there were some areas that are not very strongly sketched out. I mean, the transport ones, the headline change is enormously important to move from predict and provide to a vision led approach to transport. But there needs to be a lot more detail about how that's going to be operationalized. Otherwise, it will be a useless headline in the document and not something that makes a difference when it comes to guiding developers and us being able to ensure that we get the right developments. On the climate change front, the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission has been working on a response to the NPF, and I'd commend it to members' attention and to the officers' attention, because it does try and deal with the issue of how you have a meaningful process in terms of the carbon impacts of new development. And it makes a number of suggestions there in terms of both carbon assessment, which therefore helps you to judge individual applications, but also the framework that needs to be set in terms of how, once you know the figures, how you actually then judge them. So I'd commend that document to officers. I think, interestingly enough, it picks up another quite significant issue. It makes the point in terms of trying to meet this 300,000 new houses a year. Savills and others have been making estimates of how much the private sector housing could deliver, and it's pretty clear that the public sector, in whatever form, is actually going to have to take an awful lot of the strain in order to meet that target. They're suggesting 40 to Savills were suggesting 40 to 47% needs to be met that way. So in terms of affordable housing, so the 50% target just on land that comes out of the green belt perhaps is something else that we need to cover in the report, because frankly there probably need to be some minimum targets for other major development sites if the affordable housing need is going to be adequately addressed. And if it's not in the national guidance, it will be very difficult given or the viability and other tests for individual local authorities to make their teeth meet in terms of local targets. So I do think that's something that needs to be fed back and addressed in the final version of the new national planning framework. Yes, sorry. The other thing is, I hope we do pick up the STA short-term lets issue. In that's something that, because it's taking out such a lot of housing supply in a lot of areas, really does need to be adequately addressed in this document as well as the separate proposed legislation. And the other one, which Alison sort of flagged as an omission, is obviously accessible housing. And that's particularly disappointing because the last government actually consulted on a set of proposals, and they've had the responses and published the responses. So that actually the government has most of the information necessary to make a decision on that part. So again, I'd hope we would pick that issue up to ensure that we do have more lifetime accessible homes and so on. Thank you.
Thanks. And just so that I don't add my own bit later, I think, fully support the short-term let bit and make a robust response. So I think we should definitely add that in there. And then on the climate change element, we need some kind of embodied carbon target for developments, because you can't build 1.5 million new homes without any commitment to what those homes are going to be built out of or how they're going to be designed. So it's just poor, really. Councillor Coles, please. No, sorry, I thought you'd indicated before. Well, we'll take you. Councillor Hook, please, and then.
Thank you. I mean, it should have been probably a supplementary, but I wholly support what Councillor Orrell said about developers, because it's not really right that the council then has to give away more land and the green belt's more used up because developers aren't building. So, and because it goes up the percentage with that basic thing. And I've just from the ward I'm in, there's a development that's been approved since 2007. I remember going to a presentation during that election campaign on it. There's another one in my ward that was going to be 3,000 houses. Somehow it's gone down to less than 1,400 houses, but that's going to take them 15 years to build because they're doing a little tranche of 100 here, then 100 there. And it's just painful, and besides that, the first lot of people, when they move in, won't get the little shopping mall in the middle with all the shops and the town hall and all the other things that people need because they're so far out of York. And that's the other thing, all these things that start eating up into the green belt, they're going to need buses to get there, or else they're going to be as sustainable as burning fires all over the place and chopping down forests. They're not going to be sustainable because everyone's going to have cars to get anywhere. And so I did like that one about the buses, but whether that actually feeds through into forcing bus companies to run buses or making us decent private public service. And finally, what was I going to say? Yes, they talk about mixes of tenure, but they also ought to talk about mixes for your life cycle. You want single person homes when you're just setting off. Yes, you do want student accommodation when you're at university. You want family homes. And then you want places that are smaller and more accessible as you get older as well, because there's a lot of people stuck where I live, living in 5-bedroom houses, and you've got 4 entry bedrooms because all their family's gone. They can't move out because there's no smaller houses to move into. And so all that accommodation is just wasted. So there's all those sorts of things they should be thinking of, because you can see it in my ward, and a lot of people in my ward, when they're building new houses, it's for short-term holiday lets as well. So that's important too. Sorry, that's
good. Thank you. Councillor Revilius, please.
Thanks. I just looked at the green belt serving 5 purposes, and I'm surprised and a bit concerned that it doesn't include anything about ecosystem services or climate services or safeguarding our future. So it sort of feels like there's those 5 things, but there's nothing there about preserving the green belt that's going to best protect us in the future and have that strongest nature and climate value, give us flood resilience. So I feel like there's a 6th one that's missing in there. And then just reflecting on what some others have said about the scale of developments. I don't know if there is something in there, I haven't read it in enough detail, but the scale of developments, if we're going to go into grey belt and things, the scale of the development needs to be self-sustaining, so be large enough that it has the facilities to support the community there, rather than a little scatter of things all over the place. And it might be in there somewhere, but I haven't, something along those lines.
Yeah. Councillor Steele-Warshaw, please, and then.
I wanted to speak about the bit about the acknowledgement of healthy communities with greater direction and clarity on the promotion of health. Planning and health have really positive links to healthy communities, and there should be a focus on this with the links to the healthy communities and safe access to community interaction. And for this, we need to look kind of further at more than just a football pitch in areas, and kind of use our imagination a bit and look at all the safe space for girls stuff, the make spaces for girls things, and look at that, to use it for safe community interactions and make sure it's accessible to everyone, the policies for inclusive green spaces and plans for shared spaces that are accessible to all people, older and younger, in the communities.
Right. Councillor Vassey, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I read this with interest till my eyes started glazing over. My first comment would be that there's, as usual, such loose use of language. So words like sustainable development mean different things to whoever you speak to. The Oxford Dictionary says it's a development that doesn't deplete natural resources. Well, there's fewer bricks available to the building industry this year than last year. So are all homes failing to be sustainable development? Should we stop building? Does sustainable development mean environmentally sustainable or economically sustainable? Such loose words don't actually help us if we're trying to pin down how to protect our city. Similarly, the word well-designed as a replacement for beauty, they're just value judgments. And to my mind, they're completely meaningless because they simply give someone the power to make a value judgment and then cloak it in a veneer of respectability. So my first comment on the report relates to that. The second comment relates to comments that have been made by other people about local authority responsibilities and what about developer responsibilities. And I would add, what about government responsibilities? Because on page 47, there's reference to the golden rules of the NPPF. And it says the following are required where land is released through plans or individual planning decisions. Necessary improvement to local and national infrastructure, including the delivery of new schools, GP surgeries, transport links, care homes and nursery places to deliver well-designed connected places, recognising that local leaders are best placed to identify the infrastructure their community needs. That's great, but where's that coming in? Local authorities aren't doing that. How's it going to be funded? Where's the vision to make that happen? It seems to me we've got the cart before the horse. And I would love to see all of this happen. And I want to see a zero carbon future. I want to see primary care centres in small communities. But simply telling local authorities they've got to consider it isn't actually delivering change. And I just referenced there, Weldrake, 2,000 homes, 800 homes rather, 2,000 people living there. We've approved an increase of 25% in the past year. There may be more approved in the coming weeks, but there's still no primary care, no dentist, no doctor, no pharmacy, no active travel plan, no cycle paths, no decent public transport network. And I think everyone around this table would want to see all of those things. So I would suggest that we should comment back or include in the comments that officers send a clear steer that we want to see how that's going to happen rather than being invited to agree that it should exist. I have answered a whole load of the questions, and I suspect the better thing for me is to submit those to officers after the meeting rather than going through them all. But I draw on just one of them because it relates to something Councillor Revilius said earlier about the role of nature. Question 27, comments about the role of local nature recovery strategies in identifying areas of the green belt that could be enhanced. And I just stress here that I think that is absolutely vital, fundamentally important if we want to protect the natural world. We've got all sorts of organisations like Natural England, like the Wildlife Trusts and others who are continuously monitoring the performance, the existence of wildlife, where they are, what's precious, what works. Not only that, they understand more than what happens on nature reserves and special areas of conservation. They purposefully study how wildlife moves in and out of those nature reserves, how it gets from A to B. And those kind of areas that we've asked to look at here of grey greenbelt land, quite often that's low quality agricultural land. And there's kind of insinuation that that can be developed on because it has less value. But I can tell you now, the nature conservation experts will say that actually rubbishy looking piece of field that we can't plant anything on is where the curlews go when they're migrating. And I think it's absolutely important that we get that specialist knowledge in before we agree that this bit of land's great and this bit of land's rubbish. So yes, question 27. I just wanted to address that one specifically because I think it goes to the heart of some of the nature stuff. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Councillor Eyre, and I've got Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. I could make a lot of comments, but Councillor Stewart has been logging all of my contributions to the meeting. I'm sure not at all because he wants to watch the England game or anything like that. So I shall be relatively brief. The one comment I did want to make is a general point is regarding the consultation itself. And I think 8 weeks over the summer holidays, if we were consulting on a change to a play area, we would say 8 weeks over the summer holidays was not nearly sufficient as a genuine consultation. So I think we really do need to feed back that that is not a genuine consultation. A document of this complexity, 8 weeks in August and September, is not good consultation practice. The question I probably want to ask, and I'm quite happy for you to take these out and send them to me in detail, is how those numbers pan across the plan period and beyond. So one of the issues we've always had in terms of setting our local plan is that we're not just setting a local plan, we're setting greenbelt boundaries. So our local plan identifies housing for 25 years and over, and I'm not sure, looking for that, it will be an incredibly complicated formula, so it might not be for this period, to map how that 1500 to 1200 goes across years 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15 and beyond. And then my second question was around paragraph 61, which is the one on page 13, which is the one that causes me most concern because it sort of alludes to everything that's been commented on. We do need to take a planned approach. And one of the dangers I read from this document is that if that figure is taken on board and we are, well, let's not beat around the bush, light years away from a 1500 figure, there's a risk that it becomes a free-for-all, as alluded to on paragraph 61, that pretty much any greyish greenbelt land will get approved and we will have lost complete control of a planned expansion of the city and all of those issues around how we build the infrastructure, which have gone, so much work has gone into that local plan to deal with that phasing, to make sure the infrastructure plans are in place. If we just get a situation, which is equally not fair on the developers who've worked with us for many years and have bought into this 15-year development plan, to then suddenly find that anybody's popping up and going, well, 600 homes here, 400 homes here, 300 homes here, 200 homes here, and they will all get approved under, I think, quite easily under some of these regulations, and we've completely lost control of any of that planned approach.
Do you want to come back on any of that now, or do you want to respond in writing? Would you like to do a quick response and then?
I did very quickly look up in terms of the housing trajectory under the local plan in terms of how much we're delivering. So I talk about that we have an 822 housing net target across the plan period. When we look at how much we're actually delivering, we are over delivering on that target. So again, floor, not a ceiling. And when we look at across the plan period, we are looking at it being more of a 1,000 homes per annum net delivery across to the 2025 years. So the difference between, it's still quite a proportional difference between where we get to with this local plan and housing delivery and what would come through the new proposed methodology.
If it was my, I mean,
yeah.
basically, yeah, we're on the 25. So you're saying 1,000 over 25 is about 25,000 homes over the 25-year period. This would suggest nearer 22,000 over 15. Would we then have to find another 10,000?
We would have to find more.
So you're looking
more
at
sites
you're looking
under
at
this revised
35,000 homes in this plan period.
I haven't done that math, but yeah, it's something along those lines.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think there's clearly a massive piece of work as this progresses for us to look at it as a group going forwards as to how we deal with these new changes, because it's vast, really, isn't it? But that's, I've been to pick if we go forward. Councillor Fenton, please.
Just a general comment, really. I think when we've talked about local plan and planning in the past, we talk about York's sort of unique setting and environment. And I was sort of reading through these thinking what tools would we have for that to be a consideration in terms of our response to these new the new targets and the new framework. And talking about York's unique setting, can sometimes be used as a reason not to do things, which I think it kind of fails us all. But I think there's what's missing for me, and it may be in there, but I haven't picked it up, is the extent to which the council and communities can will continue to have the ability to kind of shape what goes where and when and in what configuration, to sort of truly reflect local need. As Councillor Hook pointed to, it's not necessarily the numbers, it's the types of homes to respond to changing demographics. So I suppose it's what I would hope to see is a bit more detail on how local authorities and communities can shape the delivery and the pace and the shape of the homes that I think everyone is committed to building. It's really more of a how than a whether. But I didn't pick up from the document how communities would be sort of empowered to be involved in shaping that.
Yeah. Thanks. Do you want to add anything on that? Or are you happy to take it away as a note to add in as what we're requesting, really?
Yeah, absolutely. You can take that away. I mean, just.
And how does it affect neighbourhood plans as well? Oh, sorry. How does it affect neighbourhood plans, which is obviously the current way local communities try to affect things?
So in terms of taking Councillor Fenton's point, some of that is an unknown at the moment. So it's effectively how the new government the new administration are planning to implement the changes to the local plan process as implemented through the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act. So we're awaiting an understanding of that. We understand that they will be putting something out there, but it would be helpful, as you say, to maybe put that in, and we will certainly include that in the response. In terms of neighbourhood planning, they have not enacted any changes to, as far as I'm aware, through this process. So neighbourhood plans would be able to go forward. They have an ability at the moment to identify sites for allocation, but not where they're in the green belt. That's a strategic approach that would be taken to the local plan. But as far as I'm aware, this consultation doesn't affect the ability for neighbourhood plans to come forward or the content that would be going into them.
Yeah, Councillor sorry, I've got one before and I come to you.
Yeah, so I take on board your point with that, Alison, but the neighbourhood plans are subservient to the local plan. So you can't have a neighbourhood plan that includes greenbelt land that the local plan has then taken out. So if the local plan is revised at pace quite quickly, every single neighbourhood plan would have to be amended, reviewed, and those who submitted it might not approve of the changes that you want to make. So that does create a bit of a
Yes, the strategic approach set out in the local plan, if updated, would supersede any relevant policies, any policies in neighbourhood plan where relevant. So currently I can think of examples where neighbourhood plans, for example, and this will happen upon adoption of our local plan as well. So some neighbourhood plans that are adopted at the moment have a greenbelt policy in there that restate that in applications coming forward, they would need to follow the process we would follow in development management, which is using the Wedgwood judgment, which looks at all existing evidence essentially in policy to work out whether the site should be in greenbelt and should be tested for therefore whether it meets greenbelt purposes and can be looked at. That approach already will be superseded when we adopt the local plan, for example, because we'll be setting the greenbelt boundaries in as part of that process. So those policies already will be superseded. So I expect that process, again, if we review the plan and policies come into force that override certain elements of neighbourhood plans, that would be the case. Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
Partly, could we have something in the response that says we need clarification on neighbourhood plans, because a lot of volunteers have spent many years producing these plans. If they're going to be now superseded or whatever, we need government needs to recognise what's gone on and what they think should happen in the future.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, just on that particular point from Councillor Oral, it's not just, so it doesn't look like I want to watch the England game, because I absolutely do not. I'd far rather be a Copmanthorpe Parish Council, which is quite an indictment of the England team. But anyway, on the more serious point, I don't think we should ask clarification on the Labour plans. I think part of our response should be that we want weight to continue to be given to neighbourhood plans, that it should be specifically that, and that we do want the importance of those recognised and not changed in any adverse way.
Yeah. I haven't got any hands. Councillor Vassy, I think that's the last hand we'll take, and then
thank you, Chair. I was just wondering if officers could help us understand how they will define housing need going forwards. And I'm asking because, without any disrespect to Goole, I suspect there are fewer people who want to go and live in Goole than there are who want to come in York. And you could say that there's an almost infinite housing need for York of people who come and live here and then commute to Leeds or Huddersfield or wherever. How will officers look to distinguish between local housing need, protecting that, helping local people to find homes, and enlarging a commuter belt? When that will conflict with all sorts of things like climate change and cutting carbon emissions and everything else. So how do you see that working?
So bring it to the consultation. The consultation makes the standard method and the revised standard method mandatory as your starting point for housing requirement. So there's a methodology that they're putting in place based upon housing stock. And applying an affordability ratio to get to that 1,251 figure that would form in any plan review, that would form the basis of our housing requirements. So effectively that's being set at the national level.
And going from that point, in terms of when you're making your decisions on your planning applications, and you listen to me all the time in terms of planning balance, it then becomes, you've got to then consider that in your planning balance in terms of the delivery and where we are. I know we do now, but it becomes different if this comes forward.
Can I just make sure I've understood, Chair? So I'm hearing that there's a way of ensuring that a certain percentage of new homes are made affordable for local need. What I'm not hearing is a sense of where the ceiling is. You're going to say, well, 100,000 homes can be built and 50% of those will be available to local need. Or is there a sense that there is a calculation of the local need for growth of new homes that informs where that ceiling is? I don't know if that makes sense. It's where does the ceiling come from?
There isn't a ceiling as far as we're aware, so we could plan for as much growth effectively as we would like to. But the national methodology sets out the baseline figure that is our target to meet across the plan period on an annual basis. So in terms of local needs, if you're talking about affordable housing needs, we would have a slightly separate evidence base, I would say, looking at local needs for affordable housing and looking at the different tenures in that would inform that process as well. So we were looking at, let's say a proportion of that mandatory figure and how much that would need to be as affordable delivery.
Just to supplement that, it really picks up on Councillor Ayres' point earlier around unplanned growth. So the quicker we can get to a point where we have a refreshed local plan that identifies those sites that will contribute towards those housing figures of 1,500 a year, the better we're in a position to plan the growth.
A quick one. I don't think we're ever going to get to the bottom of how strategic housing land assessment works in seconds.
But as I understood it, in essence, the demand-led growth is a 0.8% figure. The suggestion in your baseline is, which used to be population-based, you've taken away the population growth element and replaced it with a 0.8% increase in housing stock. That's the sort of baseline demand. We believe 0.8% a year is the growth level of houses. And then you multiply it by 1.6 because of the affordability issues. So your demand is kind of at 0.8. You're then adding another 750 homes a year on in terms of getting the price of affordability ratio back down again.
That's my understanding. And in terms of the affordability ratio, there's the ability for that to change over time as well. So that will reflect it's a national data set that is being used for that. So that could go up or down, amending that requirement figure as necessary in terms of that multiplication on the 0.8 of the housing stock.
Thanks. I aren't seen any other hands, and I'm not aware of anyone who was waiting. So I think we've done our piece of work for providing feedback. So you've got a lot to inform your consultation response. As I say, there's lots of opportunities to continue to feed into that and email officers or go through your own route of submitting your own response if you'd like to do 100+ questions yourself. We will swiftly move on to the last piece of urgent business, which is a verbal update on the local plan examination. If you want to just quickly get us where we are.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just wanted to recap. You may be aware that we're still under examination of the local plan. We recently held a statutory consultation consulting on amendments and modifications to policy H5 relating to gypsy and traveller provision. And that was following a fifth phase of in-person hearing sessions that was held in March for one day. I just wanted to confirm that we've had 36 responses, plus we are also consulted to that process, so 37 in total will be processed and reported back to the inspectors. And we're hoping to submit by as soon as possible, hopefully by the end of the month, our consultation statement, which is a Regulation 22 compliant consultation statement outlining the process of consultation, but also the comments that have been received through the consultation in relation to those proposed modifications. In relation to then sort of moving forward and next steps, it's an officer view that this is the last matter to be considered by our planning inspectors as part of the examination. Their wording to us in their letter in May, which identified the need for these modifications, explicitly said that modifications to this policy would make the policy and the plan as a whole sound. So we trust that we'll be moving forward to receiving a final report from our inspectors in due course. And hopefully that means that we'll, and subject to receipt of that report, I'll caveat, we'll hopefully be able to take to full council for adoption of that plan before Christmas. So I just wanted to give a quick update on where we were with that process.
Any pressing questions on that item? Like I say, Councillor Stewart.
it's not pressing, but obviously, Alison, you said for Christmas. When do you think in due course is likely to be? I know it's quite a tight window anyway.
My expectation would be that the inspector's report is quite advanced. We consulted on our modifications, all other modifications, between sort of February and March, April last year. So on that basis, I would expect potentially we would receive an inspector's report maybe November, and be able to progress it from there to council.
Okay, I'm not seeing every answer, so thanks for updating everybody on that, and fingers crossed, it'll all be sorted by the time we meet. I'm sure that's been said a few times before, but this time. Right, that was the final item. Thanks for everyone's time this evening. There's quite a few meaty items, but glad to get it all done. And thanks for everyone's time.